Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you. So, coming at you with a deck that I have not played on the channel before, and I still have very little experience with. That is going to be Bystial Runick. This is a deck that you've probably seen at least once or twice over on the Master Duel ladder, but it actually does not have its origins within Master Duel. Bystial Runick as a concept is actually a fairly recent innovation within the TCG, despite the TCG having access to these cards for quite some time now. And that is this is basically the deck that Joshua Schmidt got first place in, kind of taking everybody by surprise with, again, this style of deck that people hadn't really seen. And like I said, the TCG had Quem for quite some time. It's a happy coincidence that we just happen to be able to play it here in Master Duel with the most recent selection pack release that also contained Quem within it, as well as, of course, the Bystial ALuber, which I happen to have a royal copy of. So this deck is a very nice excuse to get to play one of the relatively few royals that I have. It's also kind of nice, admittedly, to be playing a Runick deck after so long. I've definitely spent my fair share of screen time lately kind of arguing against the Runick Fountain limit. That, despite the fact that I haven't played a Runick deck since the last time I played Naturia Runick, which was, I mean, God, look at the video on the channel. That probably would have been like, what, 7, almost 8 months ago, I think, by this point. So, you know, it's like, if I'm going to be talking about how Runick is such a cool archetype that can make and lift up so many cool decks, I might as well play one of them, right? So, here we are on Bystial Runick. So, some things about my build in particular. One thing you'll notice that I am lacking that was in Joshua Schmidt's build is the card duality. Duality does have some pretty interesting applications in this deck in particular, especially with the Runick monsters. Particularly, you can use the Hugin to go into Alvain, the Essence of Vanity, with the duality, basically turning it into a tuner. You can also potentially summon the Fabled Unicorn off of duality if you send Geri the Runick Fangs, because it's a light beast, while Geri is a dark beast. So duality is definitely not a bad option for this style of deck, but I also don't think it's 100% needed. You'll also notice as I searched those just now that I don't have duality or Fabled Unicorn, but again, you do not have to craft these cards in order to play this deck. What you do need in order to play this deck, as far as URs go, is, well, obviously the Runick Fountain to go with the Runick engine, as well as a couple of Hugins there as well. You don't need a whole lot of branded stuff, honestly, but you do need Grangonol and Luluwalilith. These are fairly important to have. You do need a playset of Quem. I guess you could, in theory, play less than 3, but that's like, Quem is like the main monster of this deck. That would be like playing Mathmech in Master Duel right now with less than 3 circular. It's like, could you do it and still win? Yeah, but like, why would you want to? So, Quem, I will say you do need 3 of. If you're not maxing out of this, you are playing in less than optimized build, which again, you could still see success with, but Cartesia, I play 2, you only really need the 1, but I own 2 already, and I think playing a second one is pretty good because it is one of the main cards that we will end up sending off of the Quem there. The role of the Cartesia is to be able to come back, via its own effect. Especially during the end phase. If a fusion monster sent to your graveyard, obviously we're going to be synchroing with the Runick fusion monsters, so they'll end up going to the graveyard quite nicely. Also, sending Cartesia to the graveyard allows it to be revived off of the Quem here as well. Because, yeah, when a card leaves the extra deck, you can target the Albaz or monster that mentions it, and then special summon it. So that does, in fact, include the Blazing Cartesia. Grangonol is here as a fusion option with the Cartesia. That's also why we're playing the Garura, is to have something to be able to send off the Grangonol, so we can get an extra draw out of that. The Luluwalilith is also the main thing we're going to be summoning off of the Grangonol as well. That's why these cards are pretty decently important to have, I would say. I guess it doesn't necessarily have to be Garura. It could be another fusion monster, or just another extract monster that's level 6 or higher, light or dark, that has a positive effect when being sent to the graveyard, but especially on turn 1, or just in general, like in a vacuum, the draw off the Garura ends up being the best option there. As far as the actual synchros themselves, you do want the range of 10s, including Baronne, Dis Pater, and Chaos Angel. I really like having the Shenging as well, especially for a Runick style of deck. I would even say this one is also probably needed. For the rest of the synchros, you kind of just need to have like a good amount of 6s and an 8. For my 8, I'm using the Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend. This is a post-banlist build, by the way. So most builds in Master Duel right now are playing Chaos Ruler because, it has a ton of targets, and putting the Runick spells in the graveyard is not a bad thing. They can always get recycled with the Fountain anyway. But again, this is a post-banlist version of the deck. So for my 8, I've opted for the Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend. You really don't sync for 8 that much in my little experience of the deck so far, but this is a nice going second option for the level 8 synchros. And then for the 6s, you don't necessarily need to have Tri-Edge Master, but I think this is a pretty good level 6 synchro in general, and also for this deck too, so I went ahead and just made it for this deck, because I also do plan on potentially trying it out in some other synchro decks too. But Tri-Edge Master is a pretty good 6 to go into, but you do want to have the Coral Dragon, because it is a tuner, and having a level 6 Synchro monster that's also a tuner is fairly important. To that end, we are also playing the Malong as well. Malong is also a level 6 Synchro tuner that can potentially level adjust, which might have some interesting applications, although our extra deck isn't really built for that. But namely, it can also bounce a monster when it's sent to the graveyard. Yeah, when it's sent to the graveyard by any means, but when you use it as for a synchro summon mainly. However, I will say this is also a level 6 light extra deck monster, which can be sent off of the Grangonol as well. So if it's not turn 1 and you want a Grangonol to bounce instead of draw, you can potentially send the Malong too. Malong's level adjustment does also open some potentially very interesting synchro options for this extra deck. Particularly if you bump its level up to 7 and then sync it with Geri, you could potentially go for Psychic End Punisher. Is a pretty cute option. I don't know how good that actually is, like as far as like actually using the space in your extra deck to play it, but that is something you could do. You could also make a 9 with it if you adjust its level down with the Geri, or if you adjust its level up and then sync with the Hugin, that's also a 9. You could potentially make 7s if you adjust its level down with the Hugin. There's also considerations with the Bystials as well. Yeah, I mean, Malong is a very, very flexible card as far as what it can allow you to summon. And again, if nothing else, you can send it off the Grangonol to get the bounce there, or sync with it to get the bounce as well. The Azalea is definitely not needed. There are a range of Link 2s that you could potentially play, but I think moving forward, having the second Geri in the extra deck is actually probably more important. Because this deck does have very long games, and you'll often use the Geri as part of your turn 1 combo. And sure, you can potentially recycle the Geri with your Branded Brigade. However, at the same time, I think that just having the second one in there to make sure that you can always access it if needed, and not have to rely on jumping through hoops to get to your second Geri is probably right. So yeah, you could drop the Azalea for that. Again, Tri-Edge Master you don't even have to play, although I will say having access to a level 6 non-tuner synchro monster could potentially also be very useful. So if nothing else, you should have access to, again, in the level 6 synchro option, both tuners and non-tuners. I made Tri-Edge Master because I think for non-tuners it is the best one, but you can do Stardust Charge Warrior, and realistically Stardust Charge Warrior is pretty much effectively the exact same thing. So as I touched upon earlier, this is a more grindy / control style of deck. You would expect that with the Runick deck. It's not like we're trying to like deck our opponents out by any means, but you're not making an explosive board that's gonna like win the duel on turn 1, which is something I'm more used. That's the style of deck I'm more used to playing. So like when I was playing these games and I was ending my turn 1 with like a Baron and a Fountain setup, and, you know, with maybe 1 or 2 Runick spells in hand, I'm like, is this really all I'm supposed to be doing? And yeah, it actually does end up being all you're really supposed to be doing. Again, we are looking to grind the opponent out. This is very much a control deck in that respect. I personally define control decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! As decks that want to grind the opponent out via advantage by having more cards than them, by drawing a bunch with the Fountain, by eating their stuff with various removal and disruption, and just win over the course of a long game that way. Basically, as far as I'm concerned in Yu-Gi-Oh! And pretty much every other TCG too, Control decks are ones that want the game to go on longer. The longer the game goes on, the higher of a chance the control deck has of winning. So that is the general philosophy, again, in my opinion. So again, this is a pretty standard list. I'm not doing anything too out of the ordinary, including the exclusion of, again, the duality package, because while Joshua Schmidt did get first place with the playset of duality, and it's definitely not a bad option for this deck in the slightest, it's not at all required, and in fact, it might, again, I haven't played this deck a lot, so I don't know for certain, but it might not even be optimal. If you look at Master Duel meta, the vast majority of Bystial Runick lists are not on duality, so much so that it doesn't even appear in the deck's breakdown. Now, to be fair, that doesn't mean that duality is necessarily unoptimal. It could very well be, because this card is a UR that doesn't see a lot of play in current meta, like tiered decks, although it is a very interesting option for a lot of rogue decks. Basically, what I'm getting at is that a lot of players probably don't have a playset of duality laying around, but a lot of players, if you've built, Runick or branded at any point, probably have all the stuff for this deck laying around. That was very much the case with me. I think the only things I needed to actually craft to have this list here was like the third Quem and the Tri-Edge Master. I'm pretty sure I had everything else already, so that could also very easily be an explanation as to why people are not playing duality en masse on the Master Duel variant. But again, you definitely do not need this card in order to play this deck and win with it. I just don't know personally if it's actually optimal or not, but yeah, that's basically the gist of what this deck is, what it does, and how it works. But as always, as ever, we're going to see that demonstrated in some games that we have coming up here. So let me first break down this list card by card, and then we'll watch those games. We were on 3 Maxx, 3 Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, 2 Blazing Cartesia, the Virtuous, 1 the Bystial ALuber, 3 Guiding Quem, the Virtuous, 1 Bystial Magnamhut, 3 Bystial Saronir, 1 Bystial Druiswarm, 1 Bystial Baldrake, 3 the Bystial Lubellion, 1 Runick Fountain, 2 Branded Regained, 2 Runick Tip, 3 Runick Flashing Fire, 1 Runick Destruction, again we are post-banless build, 2 Runick Freezing Curses, 2 Runick Slumber, 2 Runick Smiting Storm, 1 Runick Golden Droplet, 2 Runick Dispelling, and then 1 Branded Beast. And that'll go ahead and do it as far as the main deck goes. For the extra deck, we are on 2 Hugin, the Runick Wings, 1 Geri, the Runick Fangs, 1 Garura, Wings of Restorant Life, 1 Grangonol, the Dusk Dragon, 1 Coral Dragon, 1 Tri-Edge Master, 1 Golden Cloud Beast Malong. We have 1 Scarlight Red Dragon Archfiend, 1 Baronne de Fleur, 1 Sword Soul Supreme Sovereign Shengyang, 1 Bystial Dis Pater, 1 Chaos Angel, 1 Despian Luluwalilith, and then finally 1 Sky Striker Ace Azalea. That'll do it for our list. Let's go ahead and see these games. Okay, our first opponent is actually going to be the mirror match. Our opponent is on dualities. They're also playing Incredible Ecclesia the Virtuous, as well as the Golden Sword Soul, which is a mini package you can also play as well. Alright, we're going to be taking the first turn here, and yeah, I mean, we got our level 4 tuner, we got some Runick spells. That means we got plays. I'm going to use the Smiting Storm here to summon the Hugin. Hugin F, I'm going to pitch the Baldrake here in order to search the Fountain. The reason that I pitched Baldrake is because I wanted to save the Ash Blossom for potential disruption if needed. Obviously, we need the Runick spell in order to draw cards off the Fountain, and I need Bystial ALuber in order to make Synchro plays. I can still make Synchro plays even without the Bystial Baldrake here, thus it ended up being the card that I think was best to discard here. I have noticed actually in my brief time playing this deck already that knowing what to discard off of Hugin seems to be a huge skill with this list already in and of itself, but gonna end up making the Coral Dragon here because I really want that extra draw. Fountain before we Flashing Fire to summon the Geri. Fountain F will cycle back the Runick spells to draw a couple of cards. We get a couple of Bystial cards, no Runick spells, which is a little unlucky, but that's fine. Yeah, I'm gonna sink the Coral Dragon and the Geri to go ahead and summon out the Baronne de Fleur. That'll get us another draw off the Coral Dragon. Again, really looking for a disruptive Runick spell. We get our second Ash Blossom, so really not that great of draws. I think we are probably fine. I don't know, I might actually fine-tune our ratio of Runick quick play spells. I believe we have 15. because normally they play 1 Dispelling, but with Destruction going from 2 to 1, I put in the second Dispelling. So might have been a case of just me getting unlucky, but there were other games where this happened. So perhaps in future builds, I might try to include more Runick spells. We'll have to see after more testing. But yeah, this might not look like much, but again, we have pretty much everything I feel like we super need. We have the Omni, we have the Fountain set up. Even if we don't have the spells in hand, we have some amount of disruption with the Ash Blossom as well as the Bystials, in addition to the Baronne as well. So you'll notice that I use the Baronne effect on the Hugin and not the Ash Blossom. That might look a little bit weird, but I think this is actually the correct play, because if I think I'm up against the mirror match, which to be fair, this is the most popular Runick deck right now, I think Naturia Runick is probably still a little more powerful in Master Duel in particular, but I don't know actually, this might actually be the most powerful Runick variant now. I didn't really think about that, but regardless of if it's Naturia or the mirror match, I know that they want to synchro with this Hugin, so it's not enough for me to negate the Hugin search. I want the body off of the board. That's why I use the Baronne effect. Normally, I do like to save my Omni negate for as long as possible, because it is the most flexible type of negate, but here I thought it was worth it. Now, Hugin can put itself back, that's fine. Runick Slumber is going to drop another Hugin onto the board. This Hugin will once again activate its effect to add the Runick Fountain. I'm not going to Ash Blossom the Hugin F, I'm just going to Ash Blossom the Fountain itself, because the main reason to do that, by the way, is because that way they end up using another Runick spell, right? And the fact that it was Flashing Fire is actually super, super good for us. So, if I had used the Ash Blossom on the Hugin search, then, yeah, my opponent would not have had the Runick Fountain, but they still would have had that Flashing Fire in their hand, and they could have set that face down to mess me up on my turn by blowing up one of my special summoned monsters. However, by waiting and forcing them to activate the Flashing Fire in order to try to get the Runick Fountain draws, I can still deny the draws, but also not have to deal with the Flashing Fire on the follow-up turn. This might be a little bit risky because it does leave the Fountain up, and it's not hard for my opponent to have another Runick spell on the next turn to draw multiple cards. However, not only is that very unlikely because they only have 1 card left, we also, as you saw, had multiple Ash Blossoms. So even if that does end up being the case, I can stop the follow-up draw, and then at that point, that's also assuming that the last card in hand is the Runick spell. At that point, with the second Ash negate, they have 0 cards in hand, they're in top deck mode, and I can just control them with the Bystials, and hopefully by ripping my own Runick spell on my turn. Oh, if I had ripped a Runick spell, by the way, second Geri would have been very much needed, because I could have gone Geri plus a Bystial into Chaos Angel and banished their Fountain. So, immediately off the first game, this was, I believe, one of the first, if not the first game that I played with this deck. So immediately in that first game, I already see where the second Geri is needed. And so it probably will just be included in the build moving forward. But okay, there is our first game. Let's go into the next ones here. All right, this game is against Rescue Ace. Oh, and by the way, these games were played live on stream. So as always, if you are ever interested in checking out some of these games as they are played live, then I would highly recommend checking out the description below. You'll not only find a link to my Twitch where you can follow or sub to get updates of when I go live, but in the link I also have in the description rather, I have a link to my second YouTube channel where I upload every single VOD that goes out. So if you're ever interested, I would recommend checking out one or the other of those. Oh, poor opponent had to pass on their turn 1. That's pretty brutal. Their hand must have a lot of hand traps, and indeed, they are going to fire off a Maxx here in response to my Magnamhut's effect. But the cool thing about Bystial Runick as a deck is that it plays very, very well around a Maxx. As you can see here, I haven't even committed to activating any Runick cards yet, which means I not only get to, well, of course, draw off the brains that are gained, but I get to battle here. So I'm just going to smack my opponent with the Quem and the Magnamhut before sinking them into the Baronne de Fleur, and then setting up the Fountain before ultimately passing here. Now, you might be wondering why I would summon the Baron here, right? It's like you're giving your opponent a draw, and if your opponent had a hand on turn 1 where they couldn't do anything at all, you should probably want to give them as few draws as possible. And yes, I do think that this is generally the case, and there are a lot of situations where I would not have summoned the Baron here. However, there are a few reasons why I did opt to summon the Baron in this particular case. For one, while yes, my opponent's hand was so dead that they couldn't play anything, and giving them more draws gives them the opportunity to find more plays, that's actually not that big of a deal in the long run, because what they top deck, the few cards they drew off of Maxx and for turn, I can just try to stop those with the Baron. In this particular situation too, I also have access to Ash Blossom and a Bystial and a Runick Flashing Fire. So I have 4 pieces of disruption right here. And again, my opponent is going to have to rip a pretty good card to go with their assumedly bad hand in order to play through all this and still have something to speak of at the end of it. So that's why in this particular case, I'm not super afraid of giving my opponent a couple of extra draws, or in particular, 1 extra draw for the Baron here. And indeed, as you can see, my opponent ended up not having anything at all, and they just ultimately conceded very shortly afterward. That Rescue's HQ, by the way, was like so clearly bait to me. Like, that's the biggest Baron bait I think I've ever seen in my life. Which was evidenced by the fact they set a monster and then conceded. But, yeah, no, and especially Rescue Ace, like, HQ is not at all what I want to be negating with the Baron. As far as disrupting Rescue Ace, I'm mainly looking to stop the Hydrant and or the Turbulence. So, with the Hydrant, I'd probably just Ash the Hydrant Search, and then if they end up having the Turbulence in hand anyway, I can just Ash Blossom that whenever it tries, or I mean, Baron that whenever it tries to set a bunch of cards. So, yeah. Like I said, although it is a bit risky to give my opponent a draw there, I think that getting an Omni against a relatively dead hand was worth it in this particular situation because it accompanied a lot of other disruption that I already had. So yeah, we have a couple more games to see. Let's go into the next one. This game is going to be against Melfi, Goaty, Sprite. And when I say it's Melfi Sprite, I'm not saying they're only playing a Caddy and a Wally and nothing else in the main. They actually have, or I mean, the Caddy and the Penny, they actually have the Wally and the Puppy too. I've said before in the past that if you're going to call your Sprite deck a Melfi Sprite deck, put a damn Wally in the list. And to be fair, this opponent did. So, also, I am so insanely jealous of their Royal Gigantic. Look how pretty this card is. It's funny, I was so busy during the actual stream, like, gushing over my opponent's Royal Gigantic, I almost missed my opportunity to Ash Blossom, but they end up having the called by here. And I said during the stream, too, that, like, oh, my opponent is on the water board and Goaty sleeves. I wonder if this is Goaty Sprite. Which was just kind of funny that it actually did end up being Goaty Sprite, but alright, here they are going to end up linking off the Gigantic and the Jet for the Elf, continuing their line. I will say, Bystial Runick sometimes feels a little weak going second, but I don't think that's the deck's fault inherently, like, as a deck. I think that's kind of Runick's fault as an archetype. I've noticed that be the case too with other Runick decks in the past, but I mean, to be fair, we have the Bystial monster, so we are playing at least somewhat more disruption than a lot of other Runick variants for going second, but I don't know, the Bystials are so weird. I almost don't count them as disruption. It's so odd. It's so weird, right? Especially when deck building and trying to figure out, like, do I have a good ratio of disruption as opposed to gas? The Bystials are really hard to evaluate because it's so situational when you can actually count them as disruption. And I don't even necessarily mean that from, like, a matchup perspective. Like, this is a matchup where, you know, we can't really count Saronir as disruption because it's just not really going to ever stop any of my opponent's plays. But even against a deck like Branded, for example, a Saronir by itself is, like, not always going to do it. And that's why it's kind of hard to count the Bystials as disruption, because, again, it's not just a matter of, like, matchups. It's even within matchups where Bystials are good, it's pretty variable whether or not the Bystial is actually going to be effective disruption or not. Oh, they have the Royal Starter, too. Oh, my God. Ah, they have it all. The opponent is, like, decked out here. But yeah, they're going to surprise us a little bit here, sinking the Jet Penny and Nimble Sunfish for the Arianopis, Serpent of the Goaty. So, God, I love when sprite lists can throw together a bunch of cool stuff and make it work. A lot of people don't. A lot of people call decks like this cope, which is like, I kind of hate that, honestly. It's like, it's one of those like catchphrases slash buzzwords that people use to criticize without even really saying anything in particular. Like, that is one of my biggest pet peeves about the Yu-Gi-Oh community, is that they'll just kind of like, they'll kind of throw out like a brief buzzword as if that is like an actual valid point of criticism, like loses to X or plays itself or this list is cope. Like, none of those statements like mean anything inherently. They are not valuable statements by any stretch of the imagination. So it's like, it's just like, I call those say nothing statements, right? But that's also like a human slash life thing. There are a lot of say nothing statements in life. It's not just Yu-Gi-Oh, but yeah, no, we're just getting absolutely destroyed here. I wanted to include this game to not only demonstrate that this deck can have a potential weakness going second, but also, frankly, to show off how cool my opponent's deck is. I guess we're not like the most dead here. Like, I can potentially make a level 10 synchro. Oh no, but they have IP, so yeah, that's never happening here. Well, I guess no, they're not going for like the unicorn, they're going for the Avermax. So I guess I could still make the 10 here, but... Oh yeah, but I also put Coral Dragon in the EMZ, like a dummy, totally by accident, so I couldn't activate Smiting Storm for Geri here anyway. Not that it would do me any good, it's like I said, I had no real shot of coming back in this duel. But there we go, there is that game. Once again, a very, very cool deck from Miso Maru here. We do have one more duel to show off, let us go into it. Alright, our final game is up against Dragon Maid. You can definitely tell these games are from the very start of the season. At Diamond 5, you tend to see a lot of pretty cool and interesting decks. I mean, you can see them in the rest of Diamond and Master as well, but you all know how it works. When you're at the bottom of a rank, you know, that's where a lot of people were just chilling and vibing, hang out, and so they're usually playing some more interesting decks. Misplay on my part to not Maxx in response to the Dragon Maid, the Chamber Dragon Maid summon. Even if I didn't think it was Dragon Maids, even if I thought it was Dragon Link, I definitely still should have fired off Maxx there. Although there is also an argument that chaining it to the Hospitality, I mean, we do miss a draw, but it also does force my opponent to commit to that resource. Like, if I chained Maxx to the Chamber Dragon Maid, they could have just passed and not done anything. But they're going to fire off a Maxx of their own. Also, we do know that off of the Chamber Dragon Maid, they searched the Tiding. So we do have to be mindful of that. Yeah, we're going to have to make sure to play around that at least a little bit here. So in response to my opponent's Maxx, I'm going to fire off the Baldrake. Not only that, but also one of my Runick spells. Just getting in my summons here so they don't count towards my opponent drawing cards. Also note that we ate the Chamber Dragon Maid out of the opponent's graveyard. Now they don't have a dragon in the yard. Oh no, they have the Striker. Oh no, but they have to, hang on a second. Let me read Dragon Maid Tiding again. Target dragon monster you control and one card your opponent controls are in the graveyard. Special summon dragon maid. Oh, right. So, yeah, eating the that's right. For some reason, I thought they bounced a card out of their graveyard to their hand and then bounced a card on my field. But no, they bounced a card on their field and then also a card on my field or in their graveyard. However, eating the Dragon Maid out of the yard does still stop the second effect of the Tiding, though that would not come up until the follow-up turn. So I just misremembered the exact effect of Tiding there, but it's still not a bad thing to do, especially in response to the Maxx. We're definitely going to want to make sure that we are eating our opponent's stuff out of the graveyard. And you can also definitely tell that we're on a rank where conceding comes very easily, as our opponent did here. I guess I meant to say, we can tell we're at a rank like Diamond 5 where losing doesn't count because our opponent conceded very easily. But yeah, I mean, this game was also, even though it was very brief, does further show how well this deck plays around Maxx, as not only are a lot of our special summons quick effects, so we can fire them off in response to a Maxx, but again, as we saw in that earlier game, this deck doesn't need to do a lot of summoning, like, pretty much ever. So yeah, it just always plays well around and under Maxx C. If nothing else, you can always pretty reasonably sit under the Runick cards and you'll be fine. And as you can see here, like, we just had a ton of options as far as, like, the draws we could get off the fountain, and then the flashing fire we wouldn't have even had to have used. I could have used Tip to add something like Smiting Storm, and then from there, that would be our third Runick spell to draw 3, and guaranteed have the flashing fire going into the opponent's turn there. So that will go ahead and do it for these games. Thank you everybody so very much for watching. Let us now go ahead and move to the outro. Alright everybody, that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for watching all the way to the very end. That means a whole lot to me, and it's also a fantastic way to support the channel. And if you're interested in supporting the channel in other ways besides YouTube, there are plenty of ways to do that. If you check out the description below, you'll find a bunch of links down there. One of them goes to my Patreon. You're actually seeing the names of everyone subscribed to the Patreon on the screen right now. So if you're interested in getting your name in the credits here at the end, if you want to see more daily Master Duel content, or if you're interested in one-on-one private coaching sessions, I offer all of that on Patreon. I also stream live on Twitch. Feel free to go ahead and click that link and follow and or subscribe there. I also have the Discord community, if you want to follow that link, where hundreds of duelists have already signed up. Free to join, and you can just come hang out, talk about the game, and chill in general. Final link that's going to be in the description is my Twitter. You can follow that if you want some more notifications of what's happening with the channel. So, all in all, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day.